bugs in the driver when he was writing. He had this Emperor TV application. So when he offered support for these DVB-T sticks, he had to write drivers that would communicate with the host controller drivers, and that failed here and there and everywhere. And then I got in contact with him and said, what did you find? So I fixed it in the code, whatever. He did some binary patches to the existing drivers. I put this into the code. And there was a bug he couldn't even fix in the binary, in the OHCI driver, because it was bigger than, it just couldn't fit it in anymore. Because a binary patch doesn't allow you to expand the size of the executable. You can just patch at the place that you have. So he explained to me what was wrong, and I changed it in the code so that the bug would not appear anymore. And all along this way, when I was busy, or when I started doing this, Wim Bruels called me or wrote me an email. I don't know anymore. He said, I want to have webcam support under OS2, and it works fine with the UHCI. It works fine with USB 1.x. In other words, with the UHCI or OHCI driver, but VHCI doesn't do anything. So I said, okay, I'll try and put it in. But then I got carried away with all the bug reports that I had. But what I did, there was the problem is, it's another one of OS2's problems. These drivers were originally 16-bit only. And the problem is that the host controller drivers, for their own management purpose, they need structures in memory for all the transfers that are set up and blah, blah, blah. So the problem was that worked okay for the byte transfer, there was no problem. For the interrupt transfer was no problem. But the isochronous transfers needed much more memory. They needed overall to manage every scenario. They needed 128K of memory. So that's far bigger than a normal 16-bit segment size of 64K. So I said, okay, let's change it, and I changed it all to a different addressing mode, to linear addressing. I had to rewrite all this part of the software, so that Wim eventually could have a fairly easy, easy is relative, but I mean, we could start off with something, where you didn't have to even fiddle around with this nifty-gritty details. So at least I did that. So eventually, now we have this support on the driver. And Wim has already written an application camera application where you can show webcam pictures and stuff. Okay, then there was another problem. I saw a bug report on the Ecom Station bug tracker a long time ago from 2006 by a guy called Jürgen Ulz. And there were also other reports that when these guys plugged in a webcam, the USB.sys driver would just blow. And nobody had an idea why and what was wrong. And there was one, I would call this a design flaw in the USB.sys driver, because the problem is that if you plug in a USB device, the drivers ask the device some information, like at what rate do you want data sent, blah blah blah, and what kind of device are you, and all this stuff. And there's the thing called configuration descriptor. You don't have to remember the name, but and the problem with this configuration descriptor is it contains such a whole bunch of stuff you need to know for the device to properly operate it with. But this configuration descriptor can become very, very large in terms. Can become up to 64K of maximum size. And the problem is. The problem was that in the USB.sys driver they had basically static memory allocation, so they had a place in memory, where they just envisaged that 1K would be enough for configuration size. And now there were webcams that were having 2 or 3K of config info, and boom, that was the problem. You were just overwriting memory. So I changed all the static memory allocation to dynamic. So you can basically have arbitrary long or big configuration descriptors. Then I had a lot of problems with device attach, and I thought they would be gone by the way I fixed the host controller drivers, but they weren't. I still had problems. And the biggest problem I had was basically, or most of the time, you had a USB stick inserted on boot up, and either it would hang or it wouldn't work or something. And using an external USB hub, it was even worse. It would never work with an external USB. So I looked at the code, and there was a whole bunch of delay loops in there that somebody had desperately put in to fix something, but obviously it didn't work. Obviously, so I went through a whole lot of trial and error, removing all this stuff, and only put the delays in at the places where they were required by the USB specification. There are some delays that you have to manage. If you plug in a device, you have to wait 100 milliseconds until you access it, because you wiggle it in and goes, so you have to wait until this is over and stuff. So this obviously was put in or remained in, but everything else I kicked out, and I basically rewrote this stuff. And I hope it works better than before, at least. And then the last point, Martin Kiewitz, I don't know who you know him, but he has published a lot of software. He was doing AirBoot, or he is. I don't know if he's still, not for the OS 2 version, but maybe for I don't know. But back a couple of years ago, he had provided some rec script to read data from his Casio watch, and it didn't work with the USB stack. So he had put in some fixes to the USB D.sys driver and some zip file that he said. But the problem was, it was for an old USB D version. It was not the latest version that I had. And after a little bit of fiddling around, I said, I'm going to pick up his idea, but I'm going to implement it myself. So, and what it was all centering around was that Windows has a specific way of doing things when you plug in a device. And it doesn't follow the USB specification, but unfortunately, because it's Windows, I mean, every device manufacturer just follows, tests it on the Windows. If it's okay on the Windows, then everything is fine. So I just put it in because I said, just let's follow the Windows way. It makes no sense to try and fight Windows or something. Okay, after that, I had a look at USBcom.sys. There was not that much to do, but what needed to be done was today basically there's one vendor or one producer of USB to serial conversion chips called Prolific, and he's basically dominating the market, I would say. And the funny thing is, or the problem with USBcom.sys is, it still is, but you cannot change it. Normally, USB device classes, like something like a COM device, they should announce themselves as COM class devices, and you shouldn't worry about the manufacturer or about the vendor or whatever, because if it's a COM device, it should be served by USBcom.sys. Unfortunately, for some reason I don't even know, this Prolific chip does not announce itself correctly. It doesn't say I'm a COM device. So the stupid thing is, what you have to come up with a vendor and device ID list and say, this device uses the Prolific chip, this device uses the Prolific chip, this device, and every manufacturer can choose a different vendor ID. Yeah. So you basically have a big table, and this table was updated. I was looking at the Linux sources. I completed the table. The table was rather short. It was the driver was 10 years old. So we updated this table. We also incorporated the Prolific specific code that was floating around in the internet in various versions and variants. And finally, there was some dynamic memory allocation in this driver that was again using this OS 2 1.3 call to allocate memory, which basically means it's always allocating below the 16 megabyte physical address line, which makes absolutely no sense today. So I changed this to the new 32-bit allocation. Why would you care? You wouldn't care, but the problem is, again, if you have a lot of drivers who do it wrong and allocate below the 16 megabyte address line for their memory needs, if you load 20 drivers, you might get an out-of-memory boot up message with having plenty of memory. So this is the reason why I changed it. And I put in, to be honest, an undocumented flag /L if you really want to allocate it below the 16. You know, for any, you know, if something goes wrong. But I have never heard anybody complain, so I guess it's not necessary. But as a fallback.
On the USB comp sys, you had mentioned for mass storage that you were interested in hardware. I don't know if you would accept USB comp hardware to look at.
Yeah, if this is a problem, yeah.
Okay.
It's a time issue, obviously.
No,
but,
sure.
Maybe I should say that I'm basically doing this in my spare time. So,
oh, sure. But
okay, for the USB PRT, it's the same thing as before USB COM. There was some dynamic memory allocation that I also changed. But other than that, thank God, nothing had to be done really about this driver. Now, for this was also a problem because there were a lot of people saying their mouse doesn't work, the keyboard doesn't work, or sometimes one works but not the other, and the next boot nothing would work. So there was obviously something wrong. And unfortunately, Rüdiger Ile, again, years ago, he had started updating these 3 drivers because there were things that were just not correct. So he did already take the first step, but unfortunately, there was still a problem, and the problem was, as I said, USB HID is basically managing driver for the other 2 drivers. And now what the specific problem was if you have 2 separate devices, you have a USB keyboard with its own plug and a USB mouse with its own plug, the drivers were okay, nothing was a problem. But there are devices like these keyboard switches, the KVMs, right? And for example, I have an IR receiver that can handle mouse and keyboard, but now the problem is these devices are one device. They're just one device. Now the problem was that these composite devices, as we could call them, they have basically they're 2 devices internally, but not from the outside. So what happened was when you would plug in such a device, the USB HID driver would get a notification from the USB-D driver that there's a new device. And then it would basically, in the loop, then he would find out that it's, for my device, it would be a mouse and a keyboard device. So he would notify the one driver and the other, but there was no serialization. And the problem was, since it's only one physical device, there's a basically USB spec says, or spec, so not the USB spec, but the HID spec says you have to set up one device, and then you have to wait until this is all finished, and then you have to set up the next device and wait until this is all finished. So what I had to do is I had to build in some serialization into this driver to call the one driver first, wait until the driver finally says, okay, everything is set up fine, and then call the next driver, and don't do it all by at once. Okay, and now we are at the final topic.
Yeah.
Because now I've started working on USB MSD.add, and the problem with this driver in particular is that the other drivers were fairly close to what IBM delivered as a binary, the latest binary 10.162 driver version. But unfortunately for this driver, this is not true. It's the source code that we have, and that was in the DDK, is lacking some features that some company called, I think it was Exigen from Latvia, had implemented on behalf of IBM in the very last year, days of in the very last days of where IBM actively supported OS2. And currently, I think there are 3 topics with this driver that need to be looked at. The one that is maybe, the one that is relevant, where we have to find a prioritization. But what is currently open is the multi-LAN support, and I want to explain a little bit why this is and what it means. The multi-LAN support is necessary that, for example, if you have a card reader and it has 5 slots, you have to distinguish between these 5 slots. If you plug in a memory card in one slot and you plug in another one in another slot at the same time, potentially you basically have to tell them apart. So if you want to address them, you need to be able to tell them apart. And this, what multi-LAN means, LAN means no logical unit number. So what it does is, what it is used for is to select one of basically the card slots. So if you have a card reader, you basically need multi-LAN support, because normally it has more than one slot for different card formats and stuff. So this works in the IBM driver, but it doesn't work with the current driver built from the DDK sources, because the code is just not exist.
You didn't go to Latvia and buy somebody a beer?
Well, I think the Ecom Station tried to contact the guys from Latvia, but they're not. You cannot find them anymore. They're not existent now. They disappeared from planet Earth. Or I don't even know if the company. Yeah, I think the company still exists.
It's like aliens.
Well, in short, you will not have a chance to ask anybody, and if you did, nobody would have the source code, I guess.
Right.
Okay, the one other thing that I have personal problems with, and I thought maybe that should be fixed or looked at, is, and which I started now, but we can discuss if this is the right prioritization. So another problem that I have is that I think we need an automatic drive eject on shutdown. The problem is, at home, I have a box and I have a, what do you call this, a Western Digital book. Basically it's a hard disk with a USB connector. And obviously I have this thing, I want this thing permanently attached. I want to plug it in and leave it like that. Boot up is okay now. It will find the hard disk and it will be operable and everything, in contrast to years ago. But the problem is, when you shut down the system, there is absolutely no code in this driver to take care of the fact that you have to flush the file system and that you have to basically unhook everything, all of the partitions that are served by USB MSDT. In other words, all of the partitions that are in your memory stick. So what I started doing now, or what I did already, is find a way to find out what partitions do you have, what disk drives exist in your system, and which of these are partitioned hard drives. In other words, which of these are USB partitions or drives. And as so often with OS2, you don't have any documentation. I mean, and you cannot ask anybody. So I had a look at the OS2 DASD device manager driver, the one that basically is the interface between a file system and the real driver doing the real data transfer, which in this case for a USB drive is this driver. And thank God I found an interface to query which drives exist and which partitions exist in a drive. So now I know what drives exist, what partitions exist, what partition, what drive letters do they have, blah blah. And I also found a way into calling into the OS2 DASD driver and setting off a command to eject the hard drive, because you have this eject exa utility that allows you on a command line or even from the user interface to eject the drive, and basically what I want to do is mimic calling this eject exit. If unfortunately, it's not obviously it's not that easy. I have set this up, but it hangs the system on shutdown, so I have to do some more research, or potentially I have to come up with another solution, like having a daemon program that basically calls into the driver, hangs in there, and when it's time for shutdown, then issues the basically eject functionality. I have to. I just need to. I just need some more research and try to find a solution that works. Okay, and now, from what I heard or from what I read from various, from OS2 World, for example, from the forum, it seems to me that maybe the biggest problem right now is the handling of large floppy devices. Basically, if I read correctly, but correct me if I'm wrong, if you format a USB stick under Windows, there's no partition on this stick. It's handled like a big, large floppy. You don't have a partition. It's just treated like a floppy. You do have an MBR, I think, on each device, I think.
No, if it's a large floppy, there's no NVR. There's just a partition boot record and then the rest of the file system.
Okay.
But I don't think the standard format on Windows will do that. But a lot of the memory sticks that you get off the shelf, so from the shop, are formatted in such a way that they're just delivered as large floppies.
Okay.
Windows will create it as a large floppy, but
Always?
Not always.
Oh, okay.
At least I don't think always, but
Yeah.
it can do so.
Yeah, well, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they exist. We can't do anything with them at the moment. And the problem is that if other people have sticks with data on them or pictures or whatever, we can't really do anything with it.
If you partition a disk manager, it will be a hard drive, but if you don't,
Yeah, by default, I think it'll look good as a large floppy.
Okay.
And unfortunately, okay, let's put it this way. This driver offers you two different possibilities. It does, astonishingly. You can say that everything you plug in is a large floppy. You have a parameter to this driver that allows. It's called removable as floppy, and basically that would be what you want to have. Unfortunately, this is a global parameter, so whatever you plug in, it's treated as a large floppy. And
I didn't get it to work though.
And that might be another problem. But I mean, there's a foreseen way at least. But unfortunately, IBM's way or OS2's way of dealing with removable media is to partition it. And the reason for this is that the relevant file system that OS2 offers, so that's HPFS and JFS, they all require a partition.
Yeah.
You cannot format a large floppy in JFS or HPFS. It just doesn't work. At best, you can format it with FAT32. I'm not sure about this, but
I don't think our FAT32 will handle. Our FAT32, I don't think will handle large floppy.
But it's only a file system. It doesn't know. The file system doesn't know about partitions as such.
I'm not sure if.
But I think this is exactly where we can enter the
discussion. IFS will mount such a thing. You cannot format FAT32 on OS2 normally anyway. You could format FAT32 large floppy using DSC. DSC doesn't care whether it's a partition or not.
Yeah, but once it's...
Yeah, you have to mount it some way. So this FAT32 IFS combined with OS2, DASD, and your MSD driver will have to supply the information to FAT32 IFS that it will allow it to mount it somehow.
But then that's all LAM things too.
Well, LVM is tied in there as well. Yeah.
And that's where I think part of our development problem would be, is to integrate it into LVM. What if we used a different approach and used the NetDrive interface?
Sorry?
May work in some way, but it will be slower.
But
Sort of look back.
NetDrive?
Yeah, NetDrive, we currently use it as our EPAM station virtual file system.
Okay.
And there's been different add-ons to support, different file systems, remote file systems under FTP, and then local file systems. There's an implementation of was it FAT32 or no NTFS? And so if it's extensible enough to do something like that, maybe that might be an interesting interface to look at implementing MSD on our sticks.
Yeah, well, in theory, yes, but you don't want to re-implement the whole FAT32 IFS logic into there, or somehow you want to reuse that. I mean, it's just a way to direct it to a certain bunch of sectors on that thing, so it's really simple.
And
it doesn't need to be hard. You don't have to rewrite some IFS or something. So
and
it's technically possible, but it's not the best way to do it.
well, I was thinking where we're talking about ejecting the media, shutting down that remote file system, if you will. I believe there's constructs already built into that client technology, the virtualization file system technology to do an orderly shutdown with the ecom station shutdown process and do the ejects. But
I don't think so, because I think when you have for example, if you have a hard drive managed by the ADD driver, like the AHCI driver, I think it takes care of flushing everything to the disk when the system shuts down. It's the job of this low-level driver. So you would, to achieve the same for USB disks, I think this ADD driver would be, is the place to put it.
Yeah.
No, it has to be there.
Yeah.
Because from a logical standpoint, there's no difference between the AHCI controller and a USB controller. They're doing the same functions with the disk.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, you got different interface, different command set, but it's the same function.
I mean, the current solution I'm using myself right now, because it's the only solution, is I'm using X Workplace with a shutdown folder and calling eject on all my drives on shutdown. So that's well before the shutdown is initiated on a driver level. Before you get the shutdown command, you're basically done with everything. This is okay, but I just try to find a solution that is basically transparent to the user. I don't want to have people coming up with some.
And we might not be running PM shell. We might be using a headless scenario. And if you're shut down, you want all the devices to be able to shut down.
All that, even exactly. If you don't have the graphical interface, then you cannot do that even.
The thing is, the drivers know the shutdown is happening, and they can do the right thing. Now, eject is a little different, though.
Yes, it's more involved because.
Well, the problem is, which happens first, the eject or someone telling you? The problem with the eject is basically you're telling someone what you're going to do.
Well, I try to investigate if this is basically a synchronous action. In other words, some action that you trigger and it will finish and before it returns.
Exactly.
That was difficult to track because it goes into the OS2 DASD driver, and well, I read through the code trying to find out what happens if I trigger the eject command from this utility. What actually happens? Which code path in the DMD driver does it take? And it was not all that obvious. Let's put it this way. So
what about I think I have a USB floppy and that works okay on OS2.
yeah.
Does that have any clues about?
Doesn't have to eject.
Yeah, that's it works.
That's a separate world from this stuff.
Totally, yeah, because it's basically right through. There's no real cache.
Yeah, exactly.
No
I
caching
mean,
to worry about or anything.
Effectively, all of this becomes a problem when you're using a file system that sets up a file cache.
Right.
So if you have JFS or if you have HPFS and you have set up a cache, then you will have a problem. If you set the cache to 0, obviously there's no problem because there will never be anything in memory that needs to be written to disk. It will always happen immediately if you have. But this is exactly the problem. We have just a file cache, and it has to be flushed to disk. And what the eject utility does is it just calls a function, an I/O control function, that basically will trigger exactly that. It will basically tell the OS2 DASD manager, come on, call all the drivers to get rid of their stuff, to write it to the media. And that was the reason why I tried to mimic this behavior in the driver. I just tried to call the very same thing that eject.exe would do.
Related to what you're talking about, I find that if any of these things get into trouble, like for example, they have an MTFS drive mounted in that drive, and I try to dismount it, it fails. Or if I have ISOFS and that won't dismount, or I can't eject a USB. Then when I try to shut down the system, it hangs in the file system shutdown phase, and I have to use the big red switch, in my case the little gray switch, and then when I reboot, it's got to check disk everything.
You have this effect.
Right, what?
You already have this problem.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Like I say, if any of those things is in trouble, it seems to short circuit and prevent the entire file system shutdown. It goes into file system shutdown and then hangs.
Okay.
And it's hung. I have to use the switch and then reboot.
Yeah, I think this is one of the problems.
Is there a way to?
What the driver currently does.
What you're having trouble with, and at least shut everything else down so you don't have to check disk everything when you reboot.
Pretty much no.
Well, I can only say the current implementation inside the USB MSD driver, when you have a shutdown, it sets a flag, do not accept any other data transfer command anymore, that's all. So that's the problem. You have stuff in the cache, and this driver just says, don't ask me for anything anymore, I'm not going to do anything anymore. But you, as I said, you have to get the stuff flushed to the media, and this is lacking in the driver.
What is the mechanism for using cache on file cache on the USB MSD? It doesn't use it.
It's not at the USB level, it's
Right.
at the file system level. The
Yeah.
file system will have cache,
Yeah.
most likely.
Maybe there's the layering is you have a file system.
Yep.
The file system calls the device manager. So that's basically the file system calls into OS2 DASD.dmd, for example. And OS2 DASD finds out on what media is this thing really, physically.
It goes to your
And then it's
USB or whatever.
Right.
and then it picks the correct low-level driver,
Right.
which will eventually do the real work and basically write stuff from disk or read stuff from disk.
Would that be write cache then too, or just read?
No.
Okay.
Read-write cache. The cache implementation is not part. It's not part of the manager. It's not part of the low-level driver.
Right.
The cache management is only done by the file system. File
Okay.
system
And,
is the
and
only.
so MSD is not really the file. It is a file system.
No.
No, it's the low-level access to the hardware,
Okay.
media, to the media. Sorry.
FAT32 IFS or JFS IFS,
Right.
that's the file system.
Yeah.
That has to be this.
So what's missing? You get notification of the shutdown in the driver, is that there or not?
I get notification of the shutdown. I already implemented the stuff to eject, to call this eject command manually.
Right, but what you really want is when you're notified to hook back up in the stack to talk to the file system to ask it to please
No,
flush itself?
no,
or-
because I'm generating the eject command basically. So that does everything. That in principle, the eject executable does everything that needs to be done.
Mhm.
If you call the eject program, basically it will trigger some I/O control call, which under the hoods will call into the real driver multiple times to just get rid of all the data that is still cached. There will be data transmission requests to the media to write the data to the media.
From the files, at the file system level or at the driver level?
On the file system level.
Yeah, well, actually just.
But this is all called kernel internal. I don't. For me, it doesn't matter. I know that there's some mechanisms that I can call that will allow every file cache name to be written to the disk. And I'm trying to call this from this driver to execute.
But you don't know what it is? You don't know what to call?
Anything that'll work.
Yes, I do, but the call doesn't work for some reason that I don't know.
Oh, I see.
There's no idea.
Because it's
Like
too.
when you shut down a fixed hard disk, what happens? Is the driver notified and then the driver notifies the DASD manager to ask the file system to flush itself?
No, the driver will get a shutdown command, and it will everything that is still.
they're gonna get flushed anyways, because the shutdown calls the file systems and tells them to flush the cache. And it's all the same cache.
But
It won't eject it, that's a whole separate issue. But the JFS cache is a single entity, and so when it's told to flush, it's going to flush no matter what the key is,
Well,
unless this shuts down first.
the only thing I can say is that every time I boot up, I get a check disk every time the system reboots.
What you need is some heuristic to figure out when the I/O is actually stopped. Or
It's a
you don't
time
need to shut
thing.
down until you know you don't need any more I/O.
Well, maybe I have to discuss this exactly.
Maybe you just need to set that bit on the thing.
What is checked?
The large floppy.
It's not dirty.
Yeah.
You don't know.
But this is basically something I'm looking into, so that we, because it's really annoying, you know, you shut down the system, and every time you reboot, I always have to run a checklist command on my JFS drive. It's fairly big, so
Unless you remember to eject it manually.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
That's the.
So well before the driver gets into the shutdown phase, basically.
Yeah.
Because if you do it from the desktop, obviously you do it
Yes.
well
Yeah,
before you turn off the
It's
system.
mainly a timing issue that the file system driver is getting shut down and is trying to flush.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, your driver also gets a shutdown message and stops responding to anything. So then,
Yeah.
the file system driver cannot finish its
Okay.
flushing.
Yes, you
Something
need-
So the first test would be to put in a delay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but basically, you're shutting down too fast, because IBM never considered running JFS on USB sticks. So
Yeah.
it's your job to delay your shutdown until you're sure you're not going to get any more I/O requests.
Okay.
You know, coming back and trying to do eject, you're just going to make more I/O. And make the thing with curse where it will never work right.
Okay.
And also, there's a good possibility if you issue the eject at that point in time, it's too late to shut down anyhow for it to issue any more I/O. Because there's a certain point in time where it'll finish I/O, but it won't issue any new I/Os. It'll just fail them.
Well, I already saw that calling the eject.exe will lead to data traffic. You will get a series of data transmission commands into the driver. So yes,
Yeah.
there is something going on. Yeah.
And that data traffic may even cache.
Yeah.
Yes, basically, you've got to sort of add a delay in that, knowing that, and it may have to be a switch, or you just basically got to know basically how fast it takes for you to do I/O, or to see I/O traffic during when it's doing the flush.
Well, I
It
could.
would probably be pretty quick. You know, if you wait a couple hundred microseconds,
I can.
100 milliseconds, and you don't see any I/O.
I could also
It's
say.
probably flushed.
I could also set up a timer, and everything time I get a new command, I can rearm the timer, and when the timer expires, then I know
Exactly.
nothing.
But if the driver gets shut down, do you have to acknowledge it in some way?
No,
You cannot hold it up.
It's a one-way street.
Just a notification.
Yeah.
it's a one-way street. You cannot say wait a little, wait,
Yeah,
please
right.
don't. You can just block. I mean, it's
Yeah, but
That
that's
seems
what
like a
you
good
do.
idea, that, stepwise waiting.
yeah.
Yeah, it's basically wait until you return and say, oh, good, you're shut down.
So you don't get any,
block that I/O. It's
Sorry?
all
you don't get
over.
any report back from the IFS when the flush is complete?
No, no,
Not-
that's a misdesign. Well, it was not foreseen. For removable media to have something that is cached. I guess they were just envisaging that you use FAT or something.
Right.
But even FAT can have some cache.
Right.
FAT16
This
even can be
driver's
cached. So.
already-
Yeah.
Cached at 1 point faster than HPFS.
Yes.
Now, what if the large floppies do they write through, just like the small floppies? How does that work?
No, I don't think it has anything to do with write through. To be honest, this is a new topic for me, or at least I didn't bother up to now, even though I know that yes, there is a problem. I think it needs to be investigated of how we can. Or I have to put it another way. This driver, the USB MSD driver, defines basically, I think, 4 or 5 mass memory classes. Let's put it this way: it's a floppy class, it's removable disk, fixed disk, and optical disk or something. And and forgot CD-ROM. So fixed disk is never used for some reason. It's just not used. This class. So I guess what we have to do is to support large floppy is to for everything that we want to be treated as large floppy, we have to basically change this driver potentially in here to report back to the manager driver that it's a floppy device, for example. But because it will hopefully handle different, but I haven't dug into this deep enough.
I sort of know how to do it, but I haven't looked at the details. Essentially, what you have to do is manufacture a phantom MDR, and then move all your physical sector numbers or logical sector numbers that you report back off by one. So you replace it with this MDR, and you maintain the MDR in memory, and then you simply, when you do your physical write, you adjust to write to the correct place on the disk, because there is no partition case. So you're off by one.
Yeah, but I mean, you always the device manager can handle unpartitioned media, floppies, for example. He can normal floppy.
The problem is it only handles up to a certain size. So once it's bigger than that, if you want to handle it, you've got to think of partition.
Well,
or fix the device manager, which is a big job.
Well, hopefully, I think they invented or they tried to allow, at least at one point in time, there was a flag that you could specify for the device manager that you were using large floppies. In the old DASD code, they have it in there. I didn't even know if it's supported anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably not anymore.
But I think the idea was to support partitionless media that is bigger than the real
The
floppy
problem
size.
is a sanity check. They only allow partitionless media to be of a certain size.
Like
Or
LS
error
120s
checking
were
anything
kind of
else.
as big as they got.
Because if you think about it, there's no reason they can't handle 64 gigabyte large floppy except for the fact they choose not to. Not the field sizes or anything like that. It's just it's too big, so they say, well, wait a minute, maybe it's not really a large floppy because it's too big.
Just go in and partition. Move a few things around.
And that's all doable.
But Steve,
Yeah.
couldn't you just batch the check out? If it's only just checking
If
it,
that's all it is, yes. Someone's got to go find out where the check is and turn it off and start doing some testing and see what breaks. My guess is that's all it is. It's a sanity check because they can't imagine that the field values are not at least 16 bits.
You mean for larger media than real
Internally,
floppy?
when you keep track of the stuff,
For large
keep
floppy.
track of those sizes, it's got to keep the E for the stuff and all that sort of stuff. It's not like it's keeping CHS values. Because
But,
that wouldn't
yeah.
even handle 32, it wouldn't even handle 2 gig.
Okay, as I said, I just started with this driver, so
Yeah.
it's a whole, it's
before
another
I
layer of
did-
complexity with this device manager thing. That's
Yeah. Before I started going down this path, if it was me, I would actually figure out why it will not accept greater than 2 gig. And then we'll go from that to the solution. If I wanted to handle partitionless larger than 2 gigs.
Yeah, actually, you might first want to try out if it's really size thing or if the file system that use
I think we sort of already know that because if you stick 64 gig large floppy format, it's something you want to mount it.
Well, if you got a small state, like a 1 gig state, and formatted FAT32, large floppy, which you can do, I don't think it will accept it. It will accept it if it's FAT16. So there's also a link to the file system. The FAT16 driver is internal to the kernel, more or less. And the FAT32 is an IFS. So
Yeah.
there's probably some additional,
Something.
some additional logic needed to mount this thing and
Yeah, it may
present
not
it to the
just-
FAT32
it may not
IFS.
just be size related, yeah. Just make, you're
It's not
right.
just size, it's also contents.
And it's not impossible that they actually go off and check and see if it's that, and get
Exactly.
another standard check.
Right.
Again, all patchable if you understand why it's not defining, why it's not accepting it. Right now, all we really know is that it doesn't accept it.
Yeah, I'll just have to dig into
yeah,
how it really works.
exactly. Yeah, that's the problem.
I'm guessing at the moment.
The good news is that code is relatively straightforward and easy to track, walk into from the front.
And maybe we should get in touch because
Yeah.
you're the expert about file systems, so that helps.
Well, I'm an expert on how the file systems are on the disk. Steve's more an expert on how they're handled.
How they get to the disk.
Yeah.
Well, I learn as I go.
But I'm willing to learn.
Yeah.
And I have some experience with USB as well. I've been doing embedded software development too, also with USB.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit aware of some of the issues.
So the question is how do we go about this topic, right? This is even more pressing. At least that's what I understood from the current discussion. Large floppy support. The large floppy, sorry. Yeah, it's unfortunately I cannot.
Yeah, I think we may get overrun on the large floppy question.
That's 2 slides.
Yeah.
For us old folks, we've got.
Yeah, it's getting less and less important as people stop using sticks.
Well, but USB is the USB is one of the few ways to exchange data.
That's
over
not
the network.
over the network,
Yeah.
right? But over the network,
But,
it's
yeah.
completely wiping out
If you
all
need something
media.
port,
at this point.
something to carry around, then
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's the only
fortunately,
way.
Bluetooth is not so pervasive that we really need it. With
Yeah.
USB, we really need it. And eventually, we're going to really need USB 3.
Yeah,
But that's really just a more matter of someone sitting down and putting the labor into write the code.
Yeah.
It's not really an unknown entity, it's just a certain amount of code.
yeah.
But there is what the question that we have from the community is what I already asked you tonight, but this is the presentation. What is the effort to have USB 3.0? What is the effort needed? Or how big is the work to have a USB 3.0 working on us?
Well, it depends on how you go about it. Maybe, to be honest, I don't think I will have the time. For me, it will be too much, I guess. But I think that the feasible way or the best way to go about this is to port an existing driver and a 32-bit version and basically put the glue logic around to fit it into OS2. In other words, do the 16 to 32-bit transition thunk stuff. But it's going to be less work than starting from zero.
Well, it's not really starting from zero because we have a good working 32-bit shell that we use for multi-Mac. And it should be adaptable to porting other people. It's got all the standard hooks and all that sort of stuff. Go to 16-bit, turns itself into 32, ends up being flat address space. The real question is how close is the driver model of the 32-bit driver to what we need to be an ad driver?
Yeah.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's something in David's presentation about it too.
What's involved, just the low-level drivers need, you need a new one, like the EHCI? Or
Yes, you need a host controller driver for.
Otherwise, above that, it
Yeah.
hopefully would remain the same.
Yeah, it should be. My gut feeling is we have to do some changes to USB-D.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
That's layer 2.
some of the internal information structures have changed with USB 3. But the main part will be to write a new driver on the host controller driver.
Right.
Yeah, and that's not really a big problem because we have control of all of those sources. You make the change, you rebuild everybody to be compatible, yet you can't work. You may not be able to run the old UHCI driver with the new USB 3 driver, but that's life. You just have to upgrade it as a set.
Yeah.
You mean the USB-D?
Well, yeah, you update that, and then you have to upgrade all 4 of them. You have to upgrade, whenever you update USB-D, you may have to upgrade all of the controllers. We don't know yet.
Yeah. First shot, I would hope that we don't have. We can do an alternate path in USB-D and say, if USB 3, then do this, otherwise do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Depends.
When I look at the Linux code, it looked like it. They had they had to also jam it in somehow. So.
But see, it may just be bigger to add structured fields and not use them through the other controllers.
Yeah. We would
Then
see.
things are the same size and there's less conditional logic.
Yeah.
And it just simply doesn't matter because you're not going to look at it.
Yeah. Okay. As I said,
It's
we have.
too early to talk about that, but there's a lot of ways to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Basically.
Yeah.
I have a question for the Warpstock board.
Yeah.